Title, again, of this series is Virtue Signals, but not Virtue Signaling. Right? There's a key difference between what those two things mean. We have been looking at Peter's list of Christian virtues in chapter 1, starts about verse 5, 6, and 7. And remember, Peter doesn't give a whole lot of imperatives. Say that 5 times. Peter doesn't give a lot of imperatives in this book, but one of them is that word supply in verse 5. For this very reason, since we've escaped the corruption and we are partakers of the divine nature, for this very reason, applying all diligence in your faith, supply. So these are musts. We must add these things to our faith. And we've looked at moral excellence, and to our moral excellence we add knowledge, and to our knowledge today, the crowd pleaser, self-control. Self-control. Enkrateia is the term there. And again, that's not a very common word that you find in the New Testament, about 4 or 5 times. And we'll look at those more in depth in Bible class as we go. But here's where 2 of them are, because he uses it twice. Supply moral excellence, and then in your moral excellence, in your knowledge, self-control, and in your self-control, perseverance. See, they're all doubled because of the way that he is writing this sequence, this list. So I want to give you some fun facts about self-control in our world today, if you will indulge me for a minute. 1 in 7 Americans, that's almost 50 million people, are addicted either to nicotine, alcohol, or other drugs, which costs this government, the American government, almost $800 billion a year to rehabilitate. So all the effects that it has on people, all the things that we must do to counteract those effects costs a lot of money. While 1 billion people around the world each year suffer from the effects of malnutrition, we live in a country where $30 billion is spent every year to lose weight. Like, you ever been on a diet? I know I'm not the only one who's been on a diet, right? Like, we've all tried it. And we spend money on that endeavor because we gain weight. By the time I conclude this sermon, well over 50 million people worldwide will have viewed pornography, and they will have spent well over $6 million in order to do so. We live in the age of the 12-step program. Right? They are available for those addicted to alcohol, nicotine, drugs, overeating, sex, work, debt, gambling, and even emotions. Did you know that you could get addicted to emotions? You like to feel one certain way, not even drug-induced, but just emotions. And interestingly enough, I found this one interesting. Some are finding now that they are even addicted to 12-step programs themselves. They just like the process of the 12-step program. And the list goes on and on and on. And so to combat addictions, we now have countless, at least in this country, and I imagine worldwide, countless research institutes. We must figure this out, and we pay professionals to look into this for us. There's international symposia. We all, from other countries, come together and look into the nature of addiction. Why do we do this? Social scientific journals abound in addictive recovery institutes staffed by thousands of certified rational addictive therapists. So basically, when you boil all that down, we live in a country that encourages behavior that gets us addicted to things. Do we not? I mean, because it's all kind of about around that dollar. And then we have to spend money to reverse the effects of what those things do to us. How crazy is that cycle? So I think we all know that the opportunity to get hooked on things, to be addicted, to have excess, to lose control, can be found at every turn in our world. And sad to say it, you and I, even as Christians, are not exempt from that reality. It's one thing we have come to know about people in our life experiences, perhaps even our own selves. It's that addictive behavior is incredibly easy to develop. Anybody else here struggle when the free chips and salsa come at the table at the Mexican restaurant? Sometimes I hurt myself because it's delicious. I walk out of Mexican restaurants feeling very out of control and regretful, right? Um, we'll have a research institute on that after the sermon. Um, so what is the solution to this problematic cycle? Well, wouldn't you know it, that just like everything else, God has given us his solution to this. So in the midst of a world that encourages addiction, it's no wonder that our Creator emphasizes we must add self-control to our faith repertoire, if you will. So I want to look at you know me, I'm a connoisseur of words. I like them. We're going to look at some technical definitions to begin with. This is just the basic one, BDAG. It says that it is the restraint of one's emotions, your impulses, or your desires. Goes on to say it's also to control yourself, to abstain, or to be disciplined. One resource says that it means to have dominion over yourself. And that article went on to say that it means to take hold of yourself, to grip yourself. Thus it describes the strength of soul by which a man takes hold of himself. That's kind of where you get the phrase, get a grip. It literally means get a grip on yourself, right? You ever seen somebody help you get a grip? It's like, get a grip, man, right? You just get your attention. That's this idea, to be in full control and possession of oneself so that you can restrain yourself from every evil desire. In practicality, it's choosing to do what is right even when you feel like doing what is wrong. It's knowing that you can, but deciding that you won't. It's the ability to make progress toward a goal even when you're not in the mood to do so, when you don't feel like making an effort, when you would momentarily enjoy something else or find working toward your goal downright unpleasant. You do it anyways. And one man said it means not eating all the popcorn before the movie starts. Right? You ever done that? It's like, well, now I have nothing to eat while watching this movie because I couldn't control myself. So we're going to look at some key truths about self-control this morning, and it's alliterated. It's all going to start with F. So the first F this morning is foundational. Self-control is foundational in Christian virtue, and Peter and Paul both knew this. Remember, Paul also has his list in Galatians 5, the fruit of the Spirit, where he gives a similar sequence of things that we need to be adding, or fruits that are natural byproducts of our life in Christ. And so Peter and Paul both include self-control in their lists. In Luke 8:14, I'll just read this one for you, but it's the parable of the sower. And Jesus is explaining what each of these terrain, what each of these, where the seed falls, what kind of heart does the seed find? And he says in Luke 8:14 that the seed which fell among the thorns, these are the ones who have heard, and as they go on their way, they are choked with worries and riches and pleasures of life, and they bring no fruit to maturity. There are things that attack self-control. There are things that attack love, things that attack peace, things that attack godliness. And so self-control is that virtue that stands in the way and staves off corruption that comes from riches and pleasures of this life that seek to grab hold of us and keep us unfruitful in the kingdom. There's a man that we read about in the New Testament that if you blink, you'll miss him. He's one of those background characters, but you'll catch him in Paul's letters from time to time. His name is Demas. And as you read about Demas, you realize that he's with Paul on a lot of his journeys. But by the time that you get to the end of Paul's life, in 2 Timothy 4:10, things have changed. In earlier letters, it was Demas also sends you his greetings. Demas, the faithful brother. You know, he loves you. He's praying for you. He's with you there in spirit. But then by the time you get to 2 Timothy 4:10, Paul says that this man has deserted him for a very specific reason. Right? Paul was pretty much alone. Luke was still with him. Luke was that faithful friend that, shipwreck and all that, right? But Demas, there was one thing that got a hold of him. What was it? Paul says that this man has loved the present world. This man, there were better things. There was the grass, maybe always in his mind, was always greener. He was going to get back to it, or he was that kind of guy that you just thought he was going to get it. But the world, excess, the love, the pleasure of this world got to him, and so he abandoned the mission. And so it's no coincidence that these apostles, Peter and Paul, emphasized this fruit because the ancient Greek world also studied this concept. That's kind of where I think that's why Peter and Paul actually use this word specifically, because there's in the ancient, you hear me talk about this a lot. I love the study of how did the Greeks think about it. You know, the culture in which these guys lived. Well, in their own systems, it was a premium virtue, right? Greeks in general loved the idea of being self-controlled. There was a guy named Xenophon. It starts with an X. Xenophon. He was a follower of Socrates, so a few centuries before this. But he said this, he said, "Shall not every man hold self-control to be the foundation of all virtue? And first lay this foundation firmly in his soul, for who without this can learn any good or practice it worthily?" A few decades later, a man by the name of Plato, you ever heard of him, right? He's a student of Socrates, another student of Socrates. He writes about self-control, and he deemed it the noble aspect of a person warring against the less noble aspects of a person. Like, he understood this internal conflict. And he said that only the elite few who could bring their desires and their appetites into subjection are worthy of ruling the republic. Freedom was a premium quality in Grecian life. Anyone who was enslaved by their own passions and desires were deemed weak. So it's interesting that they deemed these people weak because they were always enslaved to something, even if that something was themselves. Right? It doesn't matter if it's an external thing. If you're enslaved by your own body, if you cannot get a grip, then you are not worthy to rule the republic as they saw it. And it's foundational because you think about all the other fruits that suffer if you don't have self-control. Can one be morally excellent if he is out of control? Will one add knowledge to their faith if they don't manage their lives so as to study God's word and come to know him more intimately? See how self-control kind of weasels into, you got to have that one to help the others. And how can you live godly and add love and joy and peace and so on if you are always on the distracted path? It's foundational. Number 2, self-control is frightening. One of my favorite passages about this concept is in Acts 24:25. And this is Paul. He's been in prison for some time. He's been paraded before these Roman rulers over and over again. And there's one guy by the name of Felix who is curious about Paul and what he has to say. So it seems like they have some conversations. But Paul took an approach one day where it says in Acts 24:25 that he was discussing righteousness with Felix. He was discussing the judgment to come, and he was discussing self-control. And while Paul, who had nothing, I mean, he's been in prison, you can imagine he hardly has a dime to his name, he's been on the kingdom mission for a long time, and you got Felix who has everything in life, right? And Paul scares this guy with what he says. It says that Felix, listening to these things, became frightened of self-control and judgments. Well, okay, maybe judgment. That almost goes without saying, right? But self-control, it scared him. He says, "Go away for the present, and when I find time, I will summon you." Spoiler alert, he never got around to it. As far as we know, he never summoned Paul to hear him talk about self-control again. Why would self-control frighten Felix? What rang a bell in his mind that made self-control this difficult teaching to listen to? I think it's probably because he lived in the most decadent society in the world at the time. America. Right? And I think that he had been indulging himself his entire life. I think he had access his whole life to all of his heart's desires. I mean, was hardly ever told no. If he wanted something, boom. I want all the popcorn you can find right before the movie. I mean, what name your sin, and this guy had access to it and was never told you can't have it. Which is why I believe this virtue is hands down, in my opinion, is the most politically incorrect virtue and fruit that there is in our country as far as Christianity goes. Because our society struggles with this fruit, I believe, the most. I think they'd be in agreement with most of them except for this one, right? Love, oh yeah, you gotta have love, right? Peace, yeah, that's great. Joy, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. Well, what was that last one? Say that again, right? Crickets. I think they would agree with all of them, but how about a little self-control in there? Telling yourself no once in a while. We don't like that one. This is America. DoorDash. Boom, it's at my doorstep. For an extra $43, you can have it delivered to your door, right? I used to do DoorDash. It was like, I would never use this service myself. But, I think even proclaiming Christians get out of control by taking the good things of God at the wrong time or in the wrong quantity or with the wrong person. People who lack self-control are intimidated by the need for it and the preaching of it because it brings accountability of your actions to the table, right? I think that's why people don't just explore this one a whole lot, because they would realize, wow, that's one I really need to work on, and you're saying there's consequences for those things? It's scary to some. It scared this Roman ruler who had power at his fingertips, but not over himself. He was enslaved to himself. Is it scary to you? Interesting. Number 3, self-control is a fight. Galatians 5:17, Paul clearly lays it out. He says, the flesh sets its desire against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh. For these are in opposition to one another, so that you may not do the things that you please. This is a fight that I believe you have to be very proactive with. You have to take it to the line yourself. Don't let it happen to you. You got to be proactive, right? Dave Ramsey's a big proponent of that. You don't react to things that happen with your money. You got to be proactive. Make it work for you. Take the fight to your finances. And I think that goes broader to moral Christian living, self-control. If it's one thing that I have learned in this journey of trying to add this one to my faith repertoire, is you have to really want it. If you go into this, just kind of tiptoe in, no strategy, no plan, you haven't been talking to God about it, you just think, I'm going to wake up tomorrow and be self-controlled, that's going to be difficult. And I'll tell you why. Because a lot of times it sounds like this. I'll just have one more, and then I'll stop. Right? I'll just do it one more time, and then I'll stop. You ever done this one? I'll wait until the weekend is over and start on Monday. You ever done that? Or I'll wait until this year is over and I'll start January 1st. I'll abuse this thing that I'm doing right up to this point, and then it's going to get easy because somehow in January 1st seems like it's the best time to do that, or Monday. You know that Planet Fitness's biggest money maker? I think it goes for any gym, really. It's the unused gym membership. It's because they know they can get you to sign up for $10 a month. You won't really miss that, but then you don't go for 12 months. You spend $120, and they're just raking that in. You got to start now. If you wait till Monday, it ain't going to happen, right? You got to start now. If you wait till January 1st, especially now, it's only February. I mean, if you wait until January 1st at this point, you better set a different goal, right? There's an old Indian proverb that says that there are two wolves living inside of you. One is good and one is evil. And one day a young brave asked an elder, which wolf wins? And the elder replied, the one that you feed. Right? There's a quippier poem about that, but you get the idea. It's where you put your time and your energy and your strength, that part of you is going to grow. Is it the flesh or is it the spirit? Is it literally the flesh with chips and salsa? I'm kidding. All right. But you have to really want it, right? Because people are people, and people are going to do what they want to do. See, Jesus, I think he wanted to eat that bread that Satan offered him the day after he came off that 40-day, 40-night fast. I mean, who wouldn't want a taste of bread after that? But he was prepared. And although he hadn't physically eaten in 40 days, he had been feeding his relationship with the Father, and he was prepared for the inevitable temptation. So I want to give you some quick practical tips for fighting the self-control fight. Number 1, remove temptation. Remove temptation. What is your trigger? Jesus figuratively tells us in Matthew 5:29 and 30, he tells us to not let our right eyes or our right hands cause us to go to hell, basically. He's saying, We should remove them so as not to stumble. He says, whatever it is, Jesus is saying, you need to find a way to navigate this fight. If it's what you're looking at, figure it out. If it's what you're doing, figure it out. And we could talk later about why I believe that's figurative. There's some people that have misapplied that text before. It makes Christianity sound really weird, like we're supposed to be self-mutilators. But you know what? At the end of the day, I'm not so sure it'd be the worst thing. I mean, who hasn't fought a really hard fight where it'd be easier if you didn't have eyeballs? It'd be easier, right, if you didn't have the part of your body that was causing you to sin. Number 2, talk back to your body. You ever had this conversation? You wake up in the morning, that alarm clock goes off. Okay, body. It's time to get up. My body doesn't want to wake up. Well, I need to get up. Paul had this conversation in 1 Corinthians 9, 26 and 27. He says, therefore I run in such a way as not without aim. Right? So he's saying, I've got intention about the way I do this. I box in such a way not as beating the air, but I discipline my body, and I make it my slave. Why? So that after I have preached to others, even if after I look like a shining star and teaching morality, that I myself will not be disqualified, because the same preachers, listen up, right? We face the same thing. We get up here and we're like, be moral, be self-controlled, have knowledge. And we go home and it's like, oh man, I got to be moral, I got to have self-control, I got to have knowledge, right? Paul says, I don't want that to happen to me. After I've preached to others, I don't want to be disqualified. He has this conversation with his body as well. My body wants to sleep. I got to get up. My body wants to eat, but I've had enough, right? My body does not want to work out, but I know me, particularly, if I stop, I may never start again. It might be a few months, right? You ever been on a roll and then you stop? Man, it's hard to get that ball rolling again. He says, have that conversation with your body. Okay, body, we're going to go do this because we need to. Number 3, look at life in hindsight. Understand that there is a reward waiting for you on the other side. Hebrews 12:11 says, all discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful, but it's sorrowful. I don't want to do this, right? And yet for those who have been trained by it, afterwards it yields the peaceful fruits of righteousness. See, Jesus, when he was in the garden, he did not want to endure the cross. He was praying, Lord, if it's at all possible, let this cup pass from me. I don't want to go through this. This is going to be painful. But he knew that on the other side, he would have accomplished the Father's will, and we would be redeemed. See, that the Hebrew writer talks about how we were the joy set before him so that he came down to do what he did. We were his reward. He said, if I don't do this, nobody's going to be brought back to my Father. We won't have a relationship with them. They won't have the blood of the sacrifice. So he understood that there was a reward on the other side of it. And we also have a joy set before us as well, and that's life with Christ. Number 4, ask God for forgiveness and then forgive yourself and move forward when you mess up. You ever not wanted to move forward after you mess up? Get close to throwing in the towel, just say, this is such a hard fight, maybe I'll just get comfortable with it for a while. But we know, both in an actual fight and in life, if you stop, if you freeze, that's where problems get started. There's a great lesson to be learned from World War II. I'm also a war battle watcher, studier. I like to read about it. And the principles of military tactics, I guess my ROTC training kind of messes with me on that. I like to hear about it. But in World War II, there was a battle called the Battle of Bastogne, and that's where basically these guys were sleeping in trenches for months, just freezing to death. I mean, it was like you couldn't move 6 inches, and you didn't know what was going to happen if you even poked your head out. I mean, it was a bad deal. And right after that, in order to get past this area of just awkward conflict for months, they had to finally make a push out into the open and take this German fortified little village. They knew that there was armor and all sorts of stuff waiting for them in there. And all along there was this guy, this is a true story, there was a guy by the name of Lieutenant Dyke. And if you ever watch Band of Brothers, it depicts this very well. But this lieutenant, he was kind of that book knowledge lieutenant, right? He He graduated from the academy, but he had never really been experienced in real conflict before. And he was really nervous about this battle coming up, and he was not doing his job, and he basically lost the trust of these guys before they went to take this stronghold. And they just depict him as this scaredy cat. And so finally, his men actually complained about him and said, "We need a different commander to take us, into this battle. We're going to lose some guys." And they just said, "No, he's your lieutenant. Do what he says." So the day comes, and they go into battle, and it wasn't 5 minutes that gunfire, bullets are whizzing, that he just had everybody get down. And so they all took cover, and then he didn't know what to do. His brain just, the pressure of the fury around him, he's just getting flustered, and you do that, you do this, and he was trying to make a decision, and guys were dying, and he finally just sat there. He didn't know what to say, couldn't respond. And the commanders that were watching, that were the really high ups, there was one guy, his name was Captain Winters, and said he almost ran out there, but he was called back by like a 3-star general and said, "Get back here, you're not the guy." And he's like, "But they're just sitting there. They're just getting picked off. What am I supposed to do?" So he runs to another platoon and finds another lieutenant that had combat experience and said, "Get out there and take that attack in there." And man, the way they depict it in Band of Brothers is this guy just runs out there. It's just like, "All right, you're relieved of duty." His name was Lieutenant Spears. He runs out there and he just brings that attack in. But the idea was, if you just sit there, if you just let life happen, if you just let it happen and you're not responding to it, if you freeze on the battlefield, problems. Self-control is a fight. Are you fighting that good fight, or are you frozen on the battlefield? Number 4, self-control is freeing. Titus 2:11 and 12 says, "The grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all men, instructing us to deny ungodliness and worldly desires, and to live sensibly, righteously, and godly in the present age." Now, at face value, the world looks at this instruction and goes, "Well, that's the opposite of freeing. You're saying that there's a God up there that's telling me what to do. He says you can and cannot have this, or you should wait to do this, or this, or this." They say, "I want to do what I want to do." But denying yourself and picking up your own cross to follow Jesus, it might sound oppressive to some, but it's actually a misunderstanding and a wrong definition of happiness in our own society. See, we've defined happiness as doing whatever you want, to whatever degree you want, with whoever you want, in whatever excess you want. Why does God now instruct us to deny these things, and why did he instruct Israel to do those things? Why did he give Israel 613 do thises and don't do theses? Right? There's 613 if you go back and count them up. And people look at that and go, "Wow, what a mean God. Look at all those rules that he has given us." But why did he do it? It was to keep them alive. It was to keep them healthy, right? There's a law about if you've got a scab that's a weird color, you got to go outside the camp for this many days, and then before you come in, you got to have the priest inspect, and if it's this color, you still got to wait, or if it's this color, then you can come in. That sounds awfully oppressive, doesn't it? Well, they didn't know any better, right? God says, "I know what that disease is going to do to you if you bring that back into the camp. So do what I say. Stay out, until the time is right." He knows, the Creator knows what is good and bad for his creation. He doesn't want us to be tangled up in those bad things. If you're still in 2 Peter, remember we've been talking about how there's those false prophets that embody every opposite bad virtue of all the ones that he gives in the list in chapter 1, right? All the good things that we as Christians supply to our faith, there's an opposite to be found in those false prophets, in those false teachers. And in 2 Peter 2, verse 19, we see that they are the perfect examples of the opposite of self-control. It says that they are promising freedom, right? When they're talking to these Christians, one way they're trying to entice them is they're promising freedom. Like, hey, if you do this, life's going to be so much better. Don't do it God's way. But he says that while they're promising the Christians freedom, They themselves are slaves of corruption. For by what a man is overcome, by this he is enslaved. They're preaching freedom, but they don't even realize they're prisoners in their own minds and their own bodies. And so all that freedom that you think you're exercising by doing what you want is actually rope that you're taking to hang yourself. It's more, hear me out, it is more freeing to be self-controlled. Are we not a peculiar people that would be the case where we actually gain freedom in actually governing ourselves and actually doing what our Creator says to do? It's not an oppressive thing. But the other side of the coin is those Christians who misunderstand what freedom in Christ really is, right? Some have taken this to mean that, okay, Jesus has died for me. That's amazing. So that frees me up to live however I want, right? Because now there's grace to be had. And now Paul, remember, he condemns that vehemently in Romans. You know, they say, shall we go on sinning so that grace may increase? And he says, may it never be. How shall we who have died to sin still live in it? You know, that's not how this works. It's basically like saying, well, I've bought the fire insurance. I guess that means I can play with matches now, right? Travis is like, no matches. right? Right? I bet you we have really good fire insurance now, though, don't we? But it's like thinking to yourself, wow, I'm so protected that now I can just abuse the system. That's not what that's intended for, right? Did Christ die for us so that we could live in an unchrist-like way? May it never be. Telling yourself no is more freeing than telling yourself yes when it comes to these things. And I can prove it with a guy by the name of Solomon. You ever heard of Solomon in the Old Testament? Go to Ecclesiastes with me. Let's read this together. Ecclesiastes chapter 2. So here's this king of Israel. Remember, under Solomon, because of the way that David had kind of set it up, even though David wasn't the one who actually built the temple, he had amassed the materials so that Solomon could come in and finish that work. The nation of Israel was never more prosperous than when it was under Solomon. The borders were never larger, right? The coffers were never fuller than when it was Solomon's turn to reign. And so this guy, David was rich towards the end of his life, kind of had to fight some battles in the wilderness and all that with Saul and all that. But Solomon comes in and he's got it all going on, right? As far as the earthly possessions and opportunity and things, he had it all. And so he goes, you know what? I'm gonna do some research here. What is the meaning of life? Right? Where can I find satisfaction? I've tried a lot of things. Where can I find it? Look at just read with me all of chapter 2, if you will. Ecclesiastes 2, it says, I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure. So, you know, let's see what happens when I just don't deny myself anything. So enjoy yourself. And behold, it too was futility. I said of laughter, it is madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine, while my mind was guiding me wisely, and how to take hold of folly until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under the sun the few years of their lives. I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself, and I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds of water for myself from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. Who wouldn't want to do that? I bought male and female slaves, and I had homeborn slaves. Also, I possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. Also, I collected for myself silver and gold, and the treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers, and the pleasures of men, many concubines. Then I became great, and I increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. Listen to this, all that my eyes desired, everything I wanted to see, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. Thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun. So here's a guy, he didn't refuse himself anything. Never told himself no. If I want it, I'm going to do it. If I want to experience it, I'm going to experience it. And at the end of the day, I don't know how many years that took him. At the end of his life, seemed like, all was vanity. I was way emptier at the end of this process than what I thought I was going to be. All these things didn't hold what I thought they were promising. And then you fast forward through the end of the book, you get to the last couple of verses, last chapter, Ecclesiastes 12. What's the end game? He says, you got to fear God, keep his commandments. That's the real. If you don't have God involved in any of that, he finally determined that living godly was the only way to find true freedom and purpose in this life. There was slavery, there was letdown, there was nothing good in all those other things. Vanity of vanities. So we are a peculiar people because we understand that saying no is more freeing than saying yes in those cases. Number 5, self-control is furnished by God. This virtue, this fruit, is naturally produced in our lives when we cease to live and Christ is allowed to live in us. Galatians 2:20. You could probably sing this to me, right? I have been crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. In the life that I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God. You almost started doing it, didn't you? Who loved me and gave himself for me. Yeah. That's good. All right. There is a big difference between self-control and self-effort. Okay? Big difference. Do you hear it? Self-effort means I'm going to do this on my own with a set of rules, right? We think that if we just enforce rules in our life and follow a checklist, that we'll be good. That by our own initiative, we can overcome anything. Well, that's a little bit different than self-control as Christ sees it, because that means we're actually allowing Christ to live within us. Our motive then isn't rule keeping, right? It's desiring every day to look and be more like Jesus. Self-control is a byproduct of that endeavor. Also, we have to know that God has put it in us to be dissatisfied with where we are if we're not where we need to be. Matthew 5, verse 6 says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness." Sometimes we read that and we go, oh, he means blessed are the righteous. And that's true, but it actually says blessed are those who hunger for it, who thirst for it, right? We're blessed for those things when we're unsatisfied with the way of the world and where we are in it and wanting to get on to better things. And also don't forget that he has given us examples of self-control to model ourselves after. The principle there basically is model yourself after winners, not losers, right? Don't take self-control advice from people who live out of control, right? Dave Ramsey would say, don't take money advice from broke people. Don't take marriage advice from people who have destroyed their marriages. Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ, right? Only imitate. If I'm not imitating Christ, don't imitate, right? But when I'm imitating Jesus, and you can see me trying to embody that, then I'm a good example, right? Have you ever told somebody, follow me? That's a high responsibility. Do what I do. Who are your role models that you can go to help with your self-control? Are you hungry? Are you thirsty for righteousness? If you decided that maybe you're okay with things the way they are? Have you decided to stop fighting and just coast on into heaven? Well, I hope you can just coast on into heaven, but I don't think it works that way. So this week, add this one. Pursue excellence in this virtue, because it is foundation. Other fruit will suffer without this one. It's frightening, yes. It takes a little bit of a mental. You got to get over this and say, all right, it's going to be uncomfortable, but I can do this. Right? So it requires a fight. Ultimately freeing. Why? Because God has furnished it to us to be able to do this. So again, self-control is that spirit-enabled ability to avoid excess, to stay within God-given boundaries. So it's a skill. It's a thoughtful, careful way of life where we do what is right despite our own desires. So that is a lesson this morning. think about how you might add this one as you have added moral excellence, as you have added knowledge. How can you add self-control to the list? So, we have a song of encouragement at this time. I'm going to move the microphone back to the right spot, Travis, and let's stand. Let's
stand up for Jesus, ye soldiers of the cross. Lift high his royal banner, it must not suffer loss. From victory unto victory his army shall he lead, till every foe is